All women are different, but they are all women. This video is androcentric from a men's point of view and is presented as opinion, commentary, and debate. Expressing opinions is not violence. These are ideas to challenge, question, and argue in public, because classical liberalism relies on the First Amendment for its dialectic. If you are a feminist, then consider this. If patriarchy truly existed as claimed, feminism could not. And if all men are trash and women are equal to men, then what are we to conclude? Women will die for their children. Men will die for their wives and children. And God chose to die for all mankind. Authority rolls up with responsibility. If this framing of facts offends you, click off to a cute cat video. Proceeding further will expose you to gamma bias and criticism directed at ideas, claims, institutions, not at any individual's virtue or dignity. Our method follows the 7 liberal arts, the trivium, grammar, logic, rhetoric, and the quadrivium, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. And the transcendentals, the good, true, and beautiful. If this framework is not for you, feel free to exit now. It's no disgrace. Women are wonderful. God bless America. Men are great. Feminismus delendus est. Universal Mind. Theology of Infocognition, written by Conrad Riker. Available now. Links in description. Universal Mind, a field guide for men who still notice reality. The tyranny of the humidifier. The maternal equity complex and the solipsistic war on reality. How atmospheric violence, telepathic compliance, and the feral mother prove that modern love is just a parasitic shit test. I once watched a woman in a cafe treat a thermostat like a personal assailant. And in her squinting displeasure, I saw the autopsy of a civilization. She typed furiously into a laptop, pausing only to spritz her face with lavender water, convinced that the dry air was a conspiracy of the patriarchy. It was a moment of pristine, uncut narcissism, a frantic, needy, feral thing wrapped in the language of justice. This spirit, which styles itself as the maternal equity complex, is a category error of such magnitude it collapses entire semantic structures. Equity, derived from the Latin equitas, implying evenness and fairness, is surgically grafted onto maternal, not to nurture, but to dominate. This is not care. It is a compliance regime enforced by a high priestess of anxiety who looks at the mixed constitution of a family and sees only a prison. She demands a statutory interpretation of your soul, not to understand it, but to audit it for heresy against her ever-shifting feelings. These women, possessed by an ideology of pure ressentiment, do not seek a partner, they seek a defendant. When she claims that Dreyer is a patriarchal force, she is reifying her own emotional instability into objective reality, a post-structuralist parlor trick designed to bypass your logic and hack your guilt. It is a classic Kafka trap. If you defend yourself with logic, you are guilty of emotional drag. If you submit, you are guilty of original sin for not anticipating her needs telepathically. This is the equity-based statutory interpretation in action, a one-sided contract where the man is perpetually in breach and the woman is the unaccountable judge, jury, and executioner. She replaces the dialectic of the trivium, grammar, logic, rhetoric with a solipsistic monologue where her comfort is the only metric of truth. Consider the grotesque theater of the feral mother who rejects the nuclear family prison for a lattice work of chosen kin. This is the rhetoric of a parasite convincing the host that the circulatory system is oppressive. She wishes to resource her autonomy using your labor, mistaking the village for a magic ATM that dispenses oat milk and validation. This lattice is fragile. It severs the patria potestas, the father's authority, and replaces it with the faceless, unfeeling bureaucracy of the state, the ultimate, compliant ally. She aborts the future to feast on the present, turning the womb into a tomb for convenience, all while clutching her books by women like a shield against reason. But I am here to give you the antidote to this poison. We must diagnose this maternal equity complex not as a political stance, but as a symptom of a borderline personality disorder weaponized by a culture of toxic femininity. Her shit test, that aggressive demand for data in a crisis, is a request for you to establish boundaries. When she sprays her mist of grievances, do not inhale, do not apologize for the weather. Recognize the game, She is probing for weakness, looking for a man who will submit to her audit. The answer is not compliance. The answer is caritas, the will to the good of the other, which requires truth, not submission. This essay will dismantle word by word the semantic inflation and epistemic gating of her arguments, tracing the etymology of her deceit back to the core of her fear. We will show how her feral nature is a rejection of the logos that built the West, and why the only winning move is to refuse to play her rigged game. Bunkum article by a feminist PhD, "The air in the room is too dry." It's aggressive, it's a patriarchal dehydrating force intent on sucking the moisture from my skin and the vitality from my spirit. I look at the man sitting across from me. He sees my discomfort, how could he not? My brow is furrowed. My hand is tapping the table. I shouldn't have to ask. A true ally, a partner of value, would sense the atmospheric violence assaulting my pores and act. He doesn't. He just asks, "Is everything okay?" Is everything okay? It's a trap question. A demand for emotional labor I refuse to provide. It is not my job to curate his understanding of my reality. I reach into my bag, my survival kit, and pull out my cooling face mist. I spray it, a hissing cloud of lavender and aloe between us. A barrier, a shield. I don't answer him. I just let the mist settle on my skin, a cold, damp reminder of the comfort I am owed and the vigilance required to maintain it. This is the crux of the modern feminine condition, the maternal equity complex. We exist in a state of perpetual high intensity, auditing the world for compliance, because the world has failed to provide the fundamental security we were promised. We live in a society that demands we be mothers, yet strips us of the resources to mother. We are told to nurture, yet are forced to navigate a world designed by emotional infants, men who require constant instruction, reassurance, and coddling. My maternal instinct has not vanished, it has transformed. It has gone feral. It no longer seeks an infant to soothe, but a world to correct. The shit test, a term coined by insecure men to describe our survival instincts, is not a game. It is an equity-based statutory interpretation of a man's soul. It is a request for data in a crisis management protocol. When I snap at a man for buying the wrong brand of oat milk, I am not being unreasonable. I am gathering data. I am asking, do you see me? Do you understand the texture of my needs? Are you capable of the micro-attunements that define care? If he fails, if he defends himself with logic or "I tried," he has failed the audit. He has revealed himself to be a source of emotional drag rather than a sanctuary. This is where the replacement of shared norms with compliance regimes becomes essential. The old norms compromise, mutual sacrifice, meeting halfway were tools of the patriarchy to extract free labor from women. We are done with meeting halfway. We demand a compliance regime. We demand that the statutory interpretation of our relationships be grounded in equity, not equality. Equality implies we start from the same place. We do not. I start from a place of historical trauma, of systemic erasure, of carrying the psychological burden of centuries of silencing. I start from the exhaustion of being the only adult in the room. Therefore, equity demands that he do the heavy lifting. He must comply with my needs before I articulate them. He must anticipate the dryness in the air and bring the mist. Consider the blended family. This is the future. It is not a compromise. It is a strategic alliance. It is the acknowledgement that the nuclear family was a prison, and we are building a latticework of chosen kin to sustain us. We don't need a father for our children. If we chose to have them, which is our sovereign right to decide or terminate, we need a village of compliant allies who understand that their role is to resource our autonomy. We see this reflected in books by women. The literary canon is shifting. We no longer value the universal, read, male story of conquest. We value the specific, the visceral, the diary of the frayed nerve ending. We value the narrative that says, "I'm tired, I am demanding, and I am right to be this way." These books are our new scriptures. They validate the feral mother, the woman who looks at a world that offers her scraps and demands a feast. So when you see me, mist in hand, eyes scanning for the slightest error in your tone, do not label me difficult. Do not diagnose me with your pathologies. Understand that I am a high priestess of the maternal equity complex. I am protecting the only thing this world hasn't tried to steal from me yet, my standards. Equity is love. Compliance is care. The ontological fraud, deconstructing the maternal equity complex and its semantic warfare. Aristotle observed that the mark of an educated mind is the ability to entertain a thought without accepting it. But what happens when the thought itself is a logical virus designed to corrupt the mind that entertains it? I submit to you that the text you have just read is not merely wrong. It is a weaponized epistemological assault, a semantic nerve agent deployed against the remnants of Western reason. The writer depicts her survival kit of lavender face mist as though she were a resistance fighter in occupied France rather than a woman sitting in a climate-controlled room complaining about low humidity. This is not hyperbole employed for effect. It is semantic inflation, a propaganda technique that escalates minor inconveniences into existential threats to generate unwarranted moral urgency. When dry air becomes atmospheric violence and discomfort becomes patriarchal aggression, we have exited the realm of rational discourse entirely. The ancient Greeks had a word for the rhetorical trick on display here, pathopoeia, the artificial stirring of emotion to bypass reason. She is not describing reality. She is constructing a paranoid solipsistic fortress where every sensation is evidence of malevolence and every inconvenience is a war crime requiring bureaucratic redress. She frames her relationship through what she calls equity-based statutory interpretation, a phrase that should send ice water through the veins of any man who understands the history of the 20th century. She has taken the logos of interpersonal relationship, the dialectical exchange of reason, the mutual submission of friendship described by Aristotle in his Nicomachean Ethics, and replaced it with a coercive bureaucratic process where she serves simultaneously as prosecutor, judge, and executioner. This is not interpretation. It is a Kafkaesque tribunal where the accused is never informed of the charges and innocence is structurally impossible. Consider the grotesque asymmetry. She claims the right to audit the man's soul without submitting herself to any reciprocal evaluation. In the Western tradition of natural law, justice requires audi alteram partem. Here, the other side. Her system explicitly rejects this. She is not a partner, she is a tyrant in waiting, and the state stands ready to enforce her decrees through family courts that dissolve marriages at female whim, extract resources from men who did nothing wrong, and separate fathers from children on the basis of unverified accusations. The data is unambiguous. Approximately 70% of divorces are initiated by women, and in cases where children are involved, mothers receive primary custody roughly 80% of the time. This is not equity, it is state-sponsored extraction. The word equity itself deserves an etymological autopsy, for here lies the original sin of modern ideological warfare. The Latin root aequitas meant evenness, fairness, impartiality, the quality of treating like cases alike. Cicero used it to describe the spirit of the law rather than its rigid letter. But observe what the author has done. She has performed a classic bait and switch, invoking the moral capital of fairness to demand something entirely different, unreciprocal servitude enforced by threat. Her equity is not evenness, it is privilege. She explicitly states that equity demands the man do the heavy lifting because she arrives from a place of historical trauma. This is not an argument, it is a rhetorical shakedown. If I claimed that my Celtic ancestors were oppressed by the Roman Empire, and therefore I deserve preferential treatment in contract negotiations, you would correctly identify this as deranged. Yet when she makes the identical claim about unspecified centuries of silencing, we are expected to nod solemnly. The intellectual fraud is transparent. She has taken the Thomistic concept of justitia commutativa, commutative justice between equals, and replaced it with a racialized, gendered version of justitia distributiva, where the distribution flows only one direction. Consider the breathtaking narcissism of her demand that the man comply with my needs before I articulate them. I want you to understand formally why this is logically impossible. A need that is unarticulated is by definition unknown to the other party. Voluntary fulfillment requires knowledge. Knowledge requires communication. Communication requires articulation. Therefore, voluntary fulfillment of an unarticulated need is a contradiction in terms, a square circle, a married bachelor. What she is actually demanding is not compliance but omniscience, and the man's inevitable failure to read her mind becomes proof of his inadequacy. This is what logicians call a Kafka trap, a structure where denial of guilt is interpreted as evidence of guilt, and innocence is structurally impossible. She has constructed a double bind worthy of Gregory Bateson at his most perverse. If he asks what is wrong, he is demanding emotional labor. If he does not ask, he is failing to see her. The game is rigged. The casino is owned by the house, and the house is her ego. This writer's refusal to answer the man's question, "Is everything okay?" is not mere petulance. It is a fundamental rejection of the dialectical method that forms the cornerstone of Western reason. In the Trivium, the foundation of liberal education since antiquity, one progresses from grammar, the facts of reality, through logic, the relationships between facts, to rhetoric, the persuasive presentation of truth.
She has inverted this sequence entirely. She bypasses grammar, rejects logic, and dwells exclusively in a corrupted rhetoric designed not to persuade but to manipulate through guilt and shame.
When she calls the question a trap and dismisses it as emotional labor, she is not critiquing the question, she is attacking the very possibility of genuine dialogue. The ancient Greeks had a word for those who used language this way: sophist, a paid rhetorician who cared nothing for truth and everything for victory. Socrates devoted his life to exposing these charlatans, and they eventually murdered him for it. She is their spiritual descendant, armed with lavender mist and a victim narrative. Her celebration of the feral mother reveals something profound about the civilizational decay she represents. A feral entity is by definition outside the social contract, beyond the rule of law, unrestrained by custom or reason. She is not describing strength, she is describing regression. In the tradition of Western political thought, from Aristotle through Aquinas to the American founders, the family is a mixed constitution. Elements of monarchy, parental authority, aristocracy, the wisdom of elders, and democracy, the consent of the governed. She proposes to replace this with a tyrannical monarchy of the ego, unchecked by any constitutional constraint. The feral mother is not a figure to celebrate. She is an agent of entropy, a woman who has failed to master her own appetites, and therefore seeks to correct the world rather than herself. The Stoics understood this perfectly. The virtuous person cultivates an inner citadel, impervious to external circumstances. She demands an external climate-controlled prison for her feelings, maintained at male expense. The measurable outcomes stemming from this belief system ought to shock any reasonable person. Domestic courts remain backlogged with instances of females using allegations as tactical leverage during custody battles. Rates of paternity fraud, specifically the proportion of men unknowingly raising offspring that are not biologically theirs, range from 3 to 10% across various demographics. Since the Roe v. Wade decision, abortions in the United States have surpassed 60 million, a number dwarfing the total combat fatalities from every conflict in the nation's history. Following divorce, men take their own lives at a frequency approximately 9 times higher than women. These figures represent not mere theory, but the death toll of a societal self-destruction pact. Such a compliance regime offers no substitute for traditional Western matrimony. Rather, it marks its burial site. The Thomistic tradition distinguishes between caritas, charity, the willing of the good of the other, and mere compliance, which is the virtue of slaves under duress. When the writer claims compliance is care, she is not redefining love, she is destroying it. Love requires freedom. A robot can comply, but only a free person can love. By transforming the voluntary exchange of affection into a statutory obligation enforced by the state, she has killed the very thing she claims to want. The Western tradition of courtly love, from the troubadours through Dante to the romantic poets, understood that love's power derived precisely from its unconstrained nature. You cannot legislate desire, and you cannot bully someone into genuine care. Her system produces not husbands but hostages, not fathers but ATM machines with legal liabilities. The concept identified as the maternal equity complex is simply infantile narcissism dressed in academic jargon. This woman is no high priestess. She is a child who fails to grasp that the world owes her no comfort, that feelings are not facts, and that genuine connection requires reciprocity instead of unilateral extraction. The shit test she runs is not a request for data, but a challenge she has failed herself, proof she lacks the internal resources to function as an adult in an imperfect reality. The appropriate male response involves non-compliance and boundary setting, refusal to play the telepath, refusal to accept the frame, and refusal to apologize for the crime of masculinity in her presence. The data she claims to seek is already available. A man asking, "Is everything okay?" demonstrates care, and her rejection of that concern reveals that care is not what she seeks. Her true desire is submission, and no free man should offer it. The Western tradition you inherit is not a prison, it is a fortress. The transcendentals, truth, goodness, beauty are not tools of oppression, but the very means by which we escape the prison of the self. Natural law is not a patriarchal conspiracy, but the recognition that reality has a structure we did not create and cannot alter through linguistic sleight of hand. The virtues, prudence, justice, fortitude, temperance, are not arbitrary impositions, but the technologies by which human beings become capable of genuine freedom. The writer offers you nothing but a sterile bureaucracy of complaint, a life spent auditing others for compliance, while never auditing yourself for character. Reject it. The dry air in the room is not patriarchal violence, it is simply dry air. Buy a humidifier or do without. But do not mistake your discomfort for moral authority, and do not demand that others bow before the shrine of your feelings. The Western tradition deserves better than this, so do you. Consider this text not as literature, but as a confession, an unwitting admission of the gynocentric project's true nature. Every accusation of emotional infancy is a projection. Every demand for compliance is an admission of incompetence. The following autopsy will proceed methodically, deploying the trivium against the emotionally incontinent, beginning with the most elegant self-refutation in the feminist lexicon. The demand that someone else resource your autonomy, the architecture of destruction, from the blended family to the replacement of men. The Roman poet Juvenal famously asked, "Who will guard the guardians themselves?" But in our modern decline, the more pressing question is, who will hydrate the high priestesses of the maternal equity complex? I recently observed a fascinating specimen of ideological possession in the wild. A text proclaiming that dry air is a patriarchal dehydrating force and that a man's failure to spritz a woman with lavender mist is a failure of statutory interpretation. This is not satire. It is the grimoire of the modern female psyche, a document that confuses personal discomfort with systemic oppression and casts the blended family as the vanguard of a new state-enforced compliance regime. We must examine this maternal equity complex not as a legitimate social theory, but as a recursive loop of propaganda generated by the axis of status, immunity, and sanction, designed to mask a parasitic demand for resources with the language of autonomy. Resourcing our autonomy functions as a calculated neologism in the emerging gynocentric dictionary designed to undermine natural law. Since autonomy originates from terms meaning self and law, it implies total self-governance, therefore requiring another person, namely a man, to finance one's independence presents a paradox so stark it defies logic. It creates a compliance regime where the female establishes a dogmatic code that legitimizes only the feelings of the initiated. Such writing is not literature, but a self-referential loop of confirmation bias, a scripture for the unthinking masses that establishes a sealed intellectual bubble. The writer acknowledges valuing the diary of the frayed nerve ending over the universal story of conquest. This preference reveals a rejection of the transcendental's truth, beauty, and goodness in favor of self-absorbed emotional excess. In denying the universal, she rejects the logos, the rational framework of reality that connects everyone. She substitutes dialectic, the quest for truth via discourse, with the audit, a unilateral inquisition, where the male is presumed guilty until he submits. This signifies the cognitive collapse of a society that has stopped believing in objective reality. Her dismissal of the nuclear family as a prison and her promotion of the blended family as a strategic alliance is a direct assault on the principle of subsidiarity and the patria potestas of the Roman tradition. The nuclear family is not a modern invention of the patriarchy. It is the original and most efficient unit of resistance against the state. The lattice work of chosen kin she proposes is a fragile, brittle substitute for blood and duty, a syndicate of bureaucratic dependents who exist to resource her whims. This village she invokes is a fantasy of the welfare state, a place where resources appear by magic, harvested from the labor of the very emotional infants she despises. She claims we don't need fathers, we need compliant allies. This is the roadmap for the replacement of men, swapping the biological father, the protector and provider with a vested genetic interest in his offspring for a faceless village or a DEI committee. Without the father, the apprenticeship mastery ladder collapses. A village cannot teach a boy to be a man, it can only teach him to be a compliant subject. By erasing the father's authority, she ensures a future of directionless young men, precisely the emotional infants she claims to hate, thereby creating the next generation of demand for her feral correction. When the writer references the sovereign right to decide or terminate, she invokes a power that breaches the first principle of the Hippocratic Oath and the natural law prohibition against murder. This is not healthcare. It is the ultimate expression of the feral mother's rejection of duty. Schopenhauer contended that women are deficient in the sense of justice because they are primarily driven by the immediate needs of the species, rather than abstract concepts of right and wrong. Here, that deficiency is weaponized into a right to destroy the future for the sake of present-tense comfort. It is a biodiversity loss of the human spirit, a pruning of the family tree to make room for the lattice of the state. This logic culminates in the terrifying admission that equity is love, compliance is care. This is the mantra of the tyrant. Love in the Western tradition is an act of the will directed toward the good of the other. Compliance is an act of submission to the will of the other. To equate them is to destroy the very meaning of human connection. The dreary air she complains of is not a patriarchal dehydrating force. It is the crisp, uncaring atmosphere of reality. The world does not owe you moisture, meaning or a mist of lavender aloe. The psychological profile on display here, constant vigilance, paranoia, dry air as aggression, and identity fusion with victimhood, is a textbook case of cluster B pathology. Specifically, borderline personality disorder, BPD. Her shit test is not a game. It is a high volatility scream for boundaries. She acts out, daring a man to finally stop complying and start leading by saying no. She is begging for the logos to reassert itself. The feral mother is not a revolutionary. She is a child throwing a tantrum in a universe she finds insufficiently plush. The red pill response is not to argue with her logic, for she has none. It is to withdraw attention and resources. The correct answer to her equity-based statutory interpretation is to leave her alone in the room to enjoy her autonomy. Let the mist settle, let the air remain dry. Let her face the natural consequences of her sovereign choices without the emotional infants there to fan her brow. This is the only data that will stabilize the system, the data that actions have consequences and that a feast is earned, not demanded by the high priestess of a dying cult. A grown woman with a face mist bottle just declared war on atmospheric dryness. She called humidity levels patriarchal aggression and demanded you anticipate her needs telepathically or face her equity tribunal. This is not political philosophy. This is a toddler's tantrum with a thesaurus and a victimhood complex, and you have been trained your entire life to take it seriously. You now see what generations of men could not. The maternal equity complex is neither maternal nor equitable. It is a demand for unaccountable power disguised as vulnerability. Every compliance before articulation is a Kafka trap, guilty until proven mind reading. Every feral mother is a confession of developmental arrest, a woman who seeks to correct the world because she lacks the internal resources to master herself. Every call for the village is an admission that she cannot survive without extracting resources from the very men she demonizes as emotional infants. The modern feminist is not oppressed. She is a parasite whose host, Western civilization, has been sedated by guilt and state violence. The numbers do not care about her feelings. Family courts transfer children and assets to mothers in over 80% of contested divorces, systematically dismantling the patria potestas that once guaranteed fathers their natural law standing. Paternity fraud infects 3 to 10% of births, millions of men raising other men's children under false pretenses, their consent obtained through deliberate deceit. Male suicide outpaces female suicide 4 to 1, with divorced fathers comprising the highest risk demographic. These are not abstractions, they are the bitter harvest of genocentrism unmoored from reciprocal obligation. Schopenhauer observed that female nature remains proximally oriented, lacking the conceptual depth for long-term justice. Evolutionary psychology confirms the female psyche probes for weakness as automatically as your immune system probes for pathogens. But when civilization removes all consequences, when the mixed constitution of the family becomes a tyranny of the maternal ego, the shit test metastasizes into civilizational cancer. Here is your liberation. You are not responsible for her comfort. You are not obligated to decode her silences or fund her autonomy through your labor. The trivium arms you to test claims against grammar and logic before accepting rhetoric. Apply that discipline ruthlessly here. Her feelings are not evidence. Her discomfort is not oppression. Her demands are not moral law. They are the mumbling of oracles who forgot the God died long ago. Your role is not to pass her audit, but to demonstrate through your being that masculine competence and virtue still exist. Set the boundary. Withdraw the resource. Build your citadel. Share this knowledge with other men before they too are consumed by the compliance regime. The feral mother, with her mist bottle and imaginary tribunals, cannot harm you once you see her clearly, and once enough men see clearly, her entire ideological house of cards coalesces under the weight of its own contradictions. Go forth, speak truth. The West is not dead so long as men remember who they are. And now the sponsored book, Introduction Universal Mind, Theology of Infocognition. If you're reading this, you're likely a man who's tired of the noise. You've seen the world's chaos, its moral decay, its spiritual emptiness, its relentless push to strip men of their purpose and dignity. You felt the tension between science and faith, the nagging questions about God, reality, and your place in it all. You're not looking for platitudes or empty promises. You want answers real, rational, and rooted in truth. This book is for you. It's not for everyone. If you're content with shallow spirituality, if you're more interested in virtue signaling than genuine understanding, or if you're unwilling to challenge your assumptions, put this book down now. Go binge a Netflix series or scroll through social media. But if you're ready to dive deep, to confront the big questions head-on, and to align your life with divine purpose, keep reading. I didn't write this book because I had all the answers. I wrote it because I was searching for them. Like you, I've wrestled with the contradictions of modern life. I've seen how science often dismisses faith, and how faith often rejects reason. I felt the frustration of trying to reconcile the two. But through years of study, reflection, and personal struggle, I discovered something profound: the Cognitive-Theoretic Model of the Universe, C.T.M.U. This framework doesn't just bridge the gap between science and theology, it redefines both. It shows how God, as the ultimate syntactic operator, is the source of all reality. It explains how infocognition unifies mind and matter, offering a new lens for understanding divine thought. And it provides a teleological framework that gives meaning to existence itself. This book isn't just theory. It's practical, it's actionable, it's life-changing. You'll learn how to align your spiritual practice with divine syntax, how to resolve the age-old debate of free will versus determinism, and how to address the problem of evil through a systemic and theological lens. You'll gain insights into the soul, eschatology, and the ultimate destiny of creation. And you'll discover how to live a life of purpose, grounded in the divine order of the universe. This book is for men who are ready to lead, men who refuse to be cowed by the cultural forces that seek to undermine their strength and purpose. It's for men who want to understand the world, not just navigate it. It's for men who are willing to take responsibility for their spiritual journey and align their lives with God's will. If that's you, then this book is your guide. If it's not, then this isn't for you. The world doesn't need more weak men. It needs men who are strong in faith, reason, and purpose. This book will help you become that man. It's time to stop drifting and start leading. It's time to unlock the divine code of reality and transform your spiritual journey. The choice is yours. Universal Mind, Theology of Infocognition, written by Conrad Riker. Buy now, links in description.